This product was produced by the APA and supported by grant number 2010 VF-GXK008, awarded by the Office for Victims of Crime, Office of Justice Programs, U.S. Department of Justice. The opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this product are those of the contributors and do not necessarily represent the official position or policies of the U.S. Department of Justice. Every year in this country, millions of children and adolescents are exposed to violence and trauma. More likely than adults, they are victims of neglect, bullying, dating violence, physical abuse, emotional abuse, and sexual abuse.
No kid should have to go through what I went through at 13, and that's why I do the advocacy work that I do to make sure that another kid doesn't have to experience that horrific pain and the shame and the guilt that I went through at 13 with a grown man. He tricked me into getting into his vehicle and going to his place, and he performed sex on me. So that was my first sexual experience, and it just hurt me in so many different ways.
Children are also exposed to media violence, community violence, and intimate partner violence. They can be exposed to violence on the internet, in school, in the community, and at home.
It was July 2nd, 1984, and my mother had cleared her home. Nobody was home, and I was the only person there. And I woke up to the loud screams of my mom outside of our home. So I got up, walked to the door, I walked to our window, and looked outside, and her ex-boyfriend, her estranged boyfriend, Marshall Brent Williams, was grabbing her by her hands, by her wrists, and dragging her toward our home. My 12-year-old brother was behind her, trying to pull her back the other way. And when they finally got to the front door, they knocked, and I looked through the window pane, and I seen my mother and brother and her boyfriend, and I opened the door. I mean, what else was I supposed to do? I let them in, and my mother ran toward the window and screaming as loud as she could, call the police, call the police. And my brother stood against the wall with one foot up, his left foot against the wall, and his arms folded, his head down. And Marshall turned to me in between all of us, in between this triangle of people. He turned toward me and he took out a gun, a black gun. He started to load that gun, and all the while I'm sitting there watching this, and I had no idea what was really going to happen. But I was playing with these Matchbox cars. I remember playing with these Matchbox cars, still very much in my childhood, and not ready for what was really about to happen. Marshall went over to my mother, and he put the gun to her face. And my mother turned to him, and she just yelled loud as she could, no. It was this echoing no she yelled, but it was quickly stopped. He had shot her twice.
This is a very serious public health issue that has huge and too often dramatic long-term mental and behavioral impact on our children. After exposure to a traumatic experience like violence, once, twice, or repeatedly, many victimized children express some kind of distress and behavioral problem.
I didn't talk about the murders at all, so I didn't get a chance to express. I was very silent about what had happened. And I didn't know what was happening around me, and I started to lose the ability to really communicate effectively with others. And so I would do it in angry outbursts. I was very violent as a child, very violent. I had exacted that same violence on my little brother. I remember me abusing him, hurting him, beating up my sister, beating up friends. And I became the bully. I became the bully, and I also got bullied in school.
I seem to get more spankings than my other brothers and sisters because after that incident, I just seemed to have become a rebel and just act out in different ways. And as I've educated myself about abuse and how survivors act, it's like I'm a textbook case. I'm no different than anyone else because what we tend to do is sometimes when you're hurt, you hurt other people. And that's what I was doing. I would get into fights. I was rebelling against the law. I was getting into mischievous behavior. And, I was exposed to pornography. And then as a 13-year-old kid, I was fascinated by that. But one of the big issues with that was I was never comfortable totally with my sexuality. I would always feel like I had to be the dominant one in the relationship, and I had to, I just tried to act out what I saw men do to women on the films, and if I wouldn't have got exposed to that, I wouldn't have known. I just wonder what it would have been like if I would have just normally found out about the birds and bees the way other kids do.
Victimized children need and deserve functional families, as well as the best, most effective treatments and services that address the harm and trauma that they've experienced. Evidence-based treatment models have proven to help them heal, recover, and build resilience.
We know that there is a critical need for mental health professionals working with the traumatized children to adopt evidence-based treatment models. Treatments that have been rigorously evaluated and have evidence to show that they work and are effective. And we know that victimized children need and deserve the best. That's why we partnered with the Department of Justice Office for Victims of Crime to create this program. The EP program was developed by the American Psychological Association through a cooperative agreement with the Department of Justice, Office for Justice Programs, Office for Victims of Crime, under the Defending Childhood Initiative. The program goal is to increase mental health professionals' capacity to provide effective treatments to children victimized by violence. Our objective is to increase the number of mental health professionals and others who are knowledgeable about basic information and overview of existing trauma-focused assessment measures and evidence-based treatment models as a way that we have to encourage them to have solid based information so they can make a decision to adopt EBTs for referral, assessment, and treatment. Together with our advisory group, the National Center for Victims of Crime, Child Help, and other experts on child maltreatment trauma, the American Psychological Association developed the program curriculum and materials to reach out to our intended audience, the mental health and allied professionals. For the curriculum, after a very rigorous review and analysis, our team came up with 6 areas that should be addressed and identified 6 assessment measures and 5 treatment models that currently demonstrate the strongest evidence for treating children who are exposed to violence.
The EP program curriculum incorporates an overview and basic description of 6 important topics involved in addressing the needs of violence-exposed children and adolescents. They include the impact of violence on children, 6 trauma-focused assessment measures, 5 trauma-focused evidence-based treatment models, the role of culture and diversity in victimization and treatment, a family-centered collaborative approach to treatment, and finally, self-care strategies. The program is delivered in 2 formats. Level 1, regional train the trainer 2-day workshops that prepare EP trainers to take the program to their communities. And Level 2, 1-day community workshops conducted by EP trainers for local mental health and allied professionals who provide services to victimized children and adolescents. At the Train the Trainer workshops, We recruit those with experience as trainers and those with expertise in assessing and treating victimized children. These professionals are trained to become EP trainers and conduct workshops in their communities. At the community level workshops, we invite those who provide mental health services, such as private clinics, those who provide referrals, school counselors, nurses, child welfare managers, judges, and others, and those who advocate for children's health and rights. Dr. Michael De Areno, professor and licensed clinical psychologist for the National Crime Victims Research and Treatment Center at the Medical University of South Carolina, and Roy Van Tassel, clinical supervisor and trauma specialist for Family and Children's Services, Child Trauma Center in Tulsa, Oklahoma, were recruited to conduct the program's Train the Trainer workshops. Both are experienced trainers and national experts on trauma, victimization, assessment measures, and evidence-based treatment models. The EP program promotes an integrated, family-centered, culturally sensitive, collaborative approach to treatment.
We understand that an effective provider for victimized children not only needs to be aware of the best science available on assessments and treatments, but they also should understand the issues surrounding the children's environments. And I mean by the role of the families, their culture, and diversity issues. In addition, we know that violence and victimization are very complex issues, and there are different systems and professionals intervening and providing services to victimized children and their families. And in that, we include school counselors, private clinicians, the nurses, the child welfare personnel, the judges, child advocates. It is clear that collaboration among them all is critical to address victimized children as a whole. We made sure that those topics are addressed in the EP program curriculum as well. What we want is for all professionals, especially those who provide the services for children who are victims of violence, and those who provide referrals, and those who help advocate for their rights, to join us and make sure that children who are victims of violence receive the best treatment that they need and deserve.
Like William Killebrew and Al Chesley, children who are exposed to violence can overcome the harmful effects of the trauma they've experienced. Today, William and Al are survivors. As empowered victim advocates, their transformational stories have reached millions around the world through numerous speaking engagements and television appearances. Their courageous work demonstrates the positive effects of the treatment they received and gives hope and inspiration to other survivors.
And it's because of groups like the DC Rape Crisis Center, the National Center for Victims of Crime, I was able to educate myself and get the proper therapy and counseling that I needed through those groups like that I was able to overcome it. And I'm still learning more about it.